a gun pressed against her skull. The operating room smelled of blood and gun oil. Armed men lined the walls, and the man dying on her table controlled half of Chicago's underworld. Dr. Ilara Voss had performed surgery in war zones, in blackouts, in rooms that shook with explosions outside. But she had never done it with a trigger finger trembling 3 inches from her ear. The enforcer behind her, a mountain of muscle with dead eyes, pressed the barrel harder and said, "If he dies, you die first." Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She looked down at the man bleeding out beneath her hands and made the only decision her mind was built to make. She would save him, and in doing so, she would lose everything she had ever called her own life. If this story already has your heart pounding, you're exactly who this channel was made for. Subscribe now so you never miss what comes next. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us the city or country where you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Part 1. The storm hit Chicago from the northwest at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. Ilara Voss had been on hour 14 of a 16-hour shift when the sky finally broke. She had already repaired a ruptured spleen from a motorcycle collision, extracted a .38 round lodged 2 centimeters from a teenager's spine, and argued with 3 separate attending physicians about resource allocation in the trauma bay. Her scrubs were stiff with dried sweat at the collar. Her left knee ached from standing on cold linoleum since 6 in the morning. She was eating a granola bar at the nurse's station, not because she wanted it, but because her hands had started shaking from hunger, when the radio crackled at the ambulance bay desk. Dispatch. Mercy General, incoming convoy, multiple GSW victims, ETA 4 minutes. Be advised, security situation is active. The charge nurse, a heavy-set woman named Paulette, who had worked trauma for 22 years, looked up from her paperwork. She and Ilara exchanged a glance that carried no words. Security situation active was the kind of language that meant something had gone very wrong out there in the dark, and whatever it was coming here. Ilara tossed the granola bar in the trash and pulled her hair back. The first SUV came through the ambulance bay doors at 9:51, then a second, then a third. They hadn't waited for the bay to fully open. The lead vehicle clipped the frame hard enough to leave a gouge in the reinforced steel, and Ilara heard the crunch from 30 feet away. Men poured out of the vehicles before they fully stopped. Big men in tactical clothing, some of them bleeding, all of them armed. 3 carried rifles that they didn't bother hiding. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a jaw like a cinder block, stepped directly in front of Ilara and shoved a badge that wasn't a badge into her face. Trauma surgeon, you, now. Ilara looked at the badge. It was a playing card. The King of Spades, laminated. She looked at him. That's not how this works. It is tonight. He grabbed her arm. Not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to make clear he had decided the conversation was finished. Our man is critical. You're going to save him. She pulled her arm back. Not panicking, taking stock. Around her, the trauma bay had already shifted into controlled chaos. Nurses falling back against the walls, 2 security guards frozen near the elevator because they were looking at the rifles and doing the math correctly. Paulette had already hit the silent alarm. Ilara could see her doing it from the corner of her eye. Whether that would help or make things worse was anyone's guess. The man on the gurney came through the bay doors at a run, pushed by 2 of the armed men because they hadn't waited for hospital staff either. He was unconscious. Mid-50s, lean, silver at his temples, and along his jaw. Someone had already done field work on him. Rough compression bandages over his left torso, medical tape that wasn't the right kind, the kind you'd find in a vehicle first aid kit. His skin was the color of old wax. 2 entry wounds, Ilara could see that much from 10 feet away, and the way blood had soaked through the improvised dressings told her at least one had nicked something significant. She moved to him, not because the man with the cinder-block jaw told her to, because her body was already in motion before her mind finished forming the thought. It had been trained for this exact moment for 14 years of medical practice, and it didn't ask for permission. "Bay 2, she said loud and flat. "Move." The armed men looked at cinder-block jaw. He nodded once. They moved. In the next 90 seconds, Ilara did what she always did. She created order out of catastrophe through pure command. She directed her team with short, hard words. Vitals. Lines. Type and cross. She cut away the field dressings herself and got her first real look at the wounds. 2 gunshots, left side, entry angles suggesting the shooter had been above and to the right. 1 round had passed clean through the intercostal space, messy, painful, but survivable. The second had not passed through. It had gone deep, and from the drop in breath sounds on the left side and the patient's deteriorating pressure, it had found the pleural cavity. He was bleeding into his lung. "We need an OR," she said. "Right now." Cinderblock Jaw stepped up to the gurney. "Do it here." "That's not here." He pulled a handgun from under his jacket and held it loosely at his side. Not pointed at anyone, just present, a reminder. Paulette made a sound low in her throat. One of the younger nurses, a kid named Marcus who had been on the floor 6 months, actually backed into a cabinet hard enough to rattle it. Elara looked at the gun. Then she looked at the man bleeding on her table. Then she looked at Cinderblock Jaw and said, with the particular tone of voice she reserved for colleagues who were making dangerous mistakes, "If I don't get him to the OR, he dies in this room, which means your job tonight was a failure. So either shoot me and watch him bleed out, or get out of my way and let me work." The room held its breath. Cinderblock Jaw put the gun away. "You've got 10 minutes, he said. "I'll take whatever he needs." She was already moving, already calling for the portable surgical cart, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "And your men stay out of my OR. You want to post one at the door? Fine. But in the room, it's my rules." He fell in step beside her as the gurney rolled. "One condition." "What?" "He lives." "That's not a condition," she said. "That's the job." They took him up to OR 3. It wasn't the ideal suite. OR 1 was better equipped for thoracic work. But OR 1 had a procedure already running, and Elara wasn't going to make someone else's patient wait. She scrubbed in with the kind of focus that felt almost chemical, the world narrowing to a tunnel that contained only her hands and the body in front of her. Around her, her team moved with practiced efficiency. Reem on anesthesia, steady and unflappable. Darnell on instruments, already anticipating her. A circulating nurse named Sophia who kept her eyes forward and did not look at the armed man standing inside the OR door, despite the hospital's own policy. Elara had told Cinderblock Jaw 1. He'd sent 2. She didn't have the bandwidth to fight it. The first hour was technical and brutal. The second bullet had lacerated the lower lobe of the left lung. Not catastrophically, but enough. She worked methodically. Her hands did not shake. They never shook during operations. That was when the rest of her shut down and something more precise took over. She had once joked to a colleague that surgery was the only time she felt like a machine, and her colleague had laughed and Elara had not, because it wasn't entirely a joke. The patient coded once, at the 47-minute mark. Flatline, no warning. "Paddles," she said, and her voice came out level. 3 rounds. The third brought him back. Darnell exhaled. Reem said something quiet. Elara said nothing. She went back to the wound. He came out of surgery at 1:14 a.m. stable, alive. The 2 guards in the OR had barely moved during the entire procedure, which told Elara they were professionals. They'd learned somewhere how to be furniture when circumstances required it. In recovery, Cinderblock Jaw was waiting. He had acquired a cup of hospital coffee at some point and was drinking it with an expression that suggested he found it offensive but wasn't going to stop. "He's stable," Elara said. She stripped off her gloves. "He'll need a few days before he can be moved, and I'd strongly recommend—" "He won't be here a few days. I'm talking about his medical recovery, not your schedule." "So am I." Cinderblock Jaw set the coffee on the counter. He studied her in a way that felt less like looking and more like cataloging. "You're good." "Yes." "Lucien said that. About the surgeon here." "I don't know who Lucien is." A pause. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile. "You do now." She didn't ask. She already understood that asking questions about the man she'd just pulled back from death was not the intelligent move. She turned to go, because there were charts to update, and she was still technically on shift and the night was very far from over. "Dr. Voss." She stopped, didn't turn. "You'll be compensated. I'm paid by the hospital," she said, and walked out. She sat in the break room at 2 a.m. with black coffee and shaking hands. Not from fear, she told herself, from exhaustion and post-adrenaline crash, and tried to remember the last time she had felt completely in control of her own life. She was 41. She had earned her board certifications through a decade of brutal training that had cost her a marriage, most of her friendships, and her 20s. She had no family in Chicago. Her mother lived in Portland, her brother in Atlanta, and neither of them understood what she actually did at work, which she had long since accepted. She lived in a good apartment on the north side. She drove a sensible car. She worked 70 hours a week because the work was the one place where her particular brand of intensity was not a problem, but a solution. She had never expected to be the person standing over an unconscious crime lord at 1 a.m. with a gun behind her head and a lacerated lung in her hands. She hadn't known who he was, not during the surgery. It was Paulette who told her quietly in the hallway at around 3 a.m. when the dust had settled enough for words. "Lucien Moreau." Paulette's voice was barely above a breath. "They're saying it on the scanner. The police band picked up chatter. Someone tried to kill Lucien Moreau tonight." Alara looked at her. "Who is—" "The Moreau family runs the port." Paulette glanced at the door. "Has for 40 years. But Lucien isn't just the port. He's everything. Warehousing, distribution, half the city council if you believe what you read. Which I don't, but still." Another glance. "He's not the kind of man who comes to a hospital. He has his own doctors." His own doctors weren't available at 9:51 p.m. in a thunderstorm. "No." Paulette studied her. "I guess they weren't. The police arrived at 3:30 a.m. Two detectives, both in the careful suits of people who had been called out of comfortable beds into uncomfortable situations. They asked Alara questions. Standard questions, the kind she had answered before when gunshot victims came through her OR. She told them what she could legally tell them. Patient was admitted, patient underwent emergency surgery, patient was stable. When they pushed on the names of the men who had come in with him, she told them she had been focused on the patient and not the faces in the room. This was not entirely true, but it was true enough that she could say it without feeling the words stick in her throat. The detectives left around 5. They did not seem satisfied. Lucien Moreau was gone by 6. She found the room empty when she made rounds. The IV pole stood alone in the center of the space, the line dangling. The monitors were off. The bed had been stripped. He had been moved, presumably, by the men who had brought him, against medical advice, against every protocol, without a discharge form, without paperwork, without anything but a vacancy where a recovering patient had been. On the bedside table, he had left nothing. No note, no compensation, as Cinderblock Jaw had promised. Just the faint impression in the pillow where his head had been, and the particular stillness of a room recently emptied by people who knew how to leave without being seen. Alara stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she turned and went back to work. She told herself firmly and with the certainty she used when she needed to close a mental door, that was the end of it. She had done her job. He had survived. Whatever world he belonged to, it was not hers, and it would not touch her again. She was wrong about that, of course. But at 6:15 a.m. on a Wednesday in November, with gray light beginning to show through the hospital windows, and her body running on coffee and stubbornness, she did not yet know how wrong. 3 days passed. On the first day, Alara slept for 11 hours, then went back to the hospital and operated on a highway crash victim and a 7-year-old with a congenital defect that the attending peds surgeon had flagged as a consult. She was good at the child, better than the attending expected. She could see it in his face when she walked out. On the second day, she noticed the car. It was parked across the street from her building. Black, nondescript, the kind of vehicle that was specifically designed not to be memorable. She noticed it because it was there in the morning when she left for work, and there in the evening when she returned, and the driver never moved. She told herself it was nothing. Neighborhood car, street parking, coincidence. On the third day, her student loan balance was 0. She had been paying down medical school debt for 9 years. The balance had been $74,000 when she last checked, 2 weeks ago. She checked her account at lunch while eating a sandwich at her desk, looked at the number for a long time, then set her phone face down on the desk and finished the sandwich without tasting it. The car was still there when she drove home. She went upstairs. She changed out of her work clothes. She poured 2 fingers of bourbon she barely drank and stood at her window looking down at the street. And she thought about debt balances and black cars and a man who had walked out of her hospital without a word and left a room that felt specifically, deliberately empty. She thought about calling the detectives. She thought about calling the bank. She did neither. Instead, she drank the bourbon. She stood at the window until the car's headlights came on, just once, briefly, and then went dark again. A signal, or a coincidence. She genuinely could not tell. What she could tell was that something had shifted in the architecture of her life, quietly and without her consent, the way a foundation crack appears overnight and you don't notice it until the wall starts moving. She had saved Lucien Moreau. And Lucien Moreau, it was becoming clear, did not believe in debts going unpaid. What he also did not believe in, it seemed, was asking permission. She pulled out her phone, opened a search, typed, Lucien Moreau, Chicago. The first result was a news article from 8 months ago. A brief piece, careful language, the kind written by reporters who choose their words the way people navigate a minefield, deliberately and with great attention to where their feet land. It said very little that was concrete. It said enough. She read it twice. Then she put the phone down on the counter and looked at her own reflection in the dark window. You do now, the man with the cinder-block jaw had said. She understood, finally, what he had meant. And she understood, with the cold clarity that only came to her in genuinely bad situations, that this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of something she had not chosen and could not yet name, moving toward her through the dark like a second storm. The loan balance stayed at 0. Ilara checked it again on Thursday morning, standing in her kitchen in her socks with coffee going cold on the counter. She refreshed the page 3 times. The number didn't change. $74,000, gone, as though someone had simply reached through the screen and erased it the way you'd wipe chalk off a board. Clean, complete, without ceremony. She called the bank. She was on hold for 11 minutes. When a representative finally answered, a young man with a flat Midwestern accent, he confirmed that yes, the balance had been paid in full via wire transfer on Wednesday morning. He could give her the routing origin if she wanted to file a dispute. A dispute, she repeated, if you believe the payment was made in error. She stood very still. Who files a dispute on a paid debt? A pause. Some customers, if the funds weren't authorized. Thank you, she said, and hung up. She drank the cold coffee. She looked at the window. The black car was gone this morning, which somehow felt worse than when it had been there. Its absence felt deliberate, like someone removing a chess piece to see how the other player reacted. She went to work. The hospital felt different in the aftermath of that Tuesday night. Or maybe she was the one who felt different, and the hospital was exactly the same fluorescent-lit institution it had always been, indifferent and relentless. Paulette watched her with careful eyes but didn't push. The 2 detectives had called once since their visit, left a voicemail asking her to return the call at her earliest convenience, a phrase Ilara had always found faintly threatening in the way that overly polite things sometimes were. She had not called back. On Friday, she had a difficult surgery. A patient with adhesions from prior abdominal work, scar tissue laid down like old rope, everything fighting her. She was in there for 4 hours and came out with the particular hollow feeling of a procedure that had gone right, but not easily. She was changing out of her scrubs in the locker room when Paulette appeared in the doorway. Someone's at the front desk asking for you. Ilara didn't look up. I don't take personal visitors at the hospital. He said to give you this. Paulette held out a folded piece of paper. Ilara took it, opened it. One line, handwritten in precise economical script. The debt runs both ways. LM. She folded it back along the same crease. Tell him I'm not available. Paulette looked at the paper, then at her. He's not someone who looks like he takes that answer well. I'm not someone who adjusts my answers based on how people look. Paulette left. Ilara sat on the bench and stared at the locker in front of her for a moment, then stood, finished changing, and walked out through the back corridor to the parking structure. The man was waiting by her car. Not Cinderblock Jaw this time. Someone younger, leaner, in a dark jacket with the collar up against the November air. His face was angular and watchful, the kind of face that gave nothing voluntarily. He was standing close enough to her driver's door that she would have to move him to get in. You avoided the front desk, he said. I use the back exit every day. I know. She stopped 3 feet from him. You've been watching me. For your safety. I didn't ask for that. No. He seemed entirely unbothered by this distinction. Mr. Moreau would like to meet with you, at your convenience. I'm busy. He expected you'd say that. A brief pause. He also wanted me to tell you that the payment for your services was not intended to create an obligation. He understands the difference. The payment was unsolicited, and I didn't agree to it. He understands that too. Alara looked at him. He was perhaps 30, with dark eyes that tracked everything and gave back nothing. There was something in the quality of his stillness that reminded her of surgery, the kind of focus that came from training rather than temperament. "What's your name?" she asked. A fractional hesitation. "Corvin." "Corvin." She tried to read the hesitation and couldn't. "Tell Mr. Moreau that I appreciate he's alive, because I appreciate all my patients being alive. Tell him the debt, if he believes there is one, is cleared, and tell him I don't meet with patients outside the hospital." She moved past him to her car door. He stepped aside. Clean, no resistance, which somehow felt like a more sophisticated form of pressure than resistance would have been. "Dr. Voss." She had the door open. "3 men followed you from the hospital 2 nights ago. We redirected them. They weren't from the police." She stood with her hand on the door. "Who were they from?" she said without turning. "People who believe that saving Lucien Moreau's life makes you valuable to them, either as leverage or as a replacement." She turned then, because that sentence required a face to go with it. His expression was the same, flat, watchful, offering information the way a weather report offered rain, matter-of-factly, without emotional investment in how you received it. "Are you threatening me?" she asked. "I'm describing your situation." "My situation," she said carefully, "is that I'm a trauma surgeon with a busy practice and no involvement in whatever world you and Mr. Moreau inhabit." "That was your situation 2 weeks ago," Corvin said. "Things change." She got in the car. She drove home. She sat in her parking structure for 4 minutes before getting out, which was 4 minutes longer than she usually sat anywhere. She called the detectives back on Saturday morning. The one who answered was named Harrow. She had his card, a plain white rectangle with a badge number. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd been waiting. "Dr. Voss, thanks for getting back to us." "I want to know what you know," she said. No preamble. She had learned over years of medicine that preamble was usually just delay dressed up in courtesy. A pause. She could hear him thinking, recalibrating. "I'm not sure I follow." "Lucien Moreau. The shooting. What can you tell me?" Another pause, longer. "Dr. Voss, typically in these conversations, we're the ones asking then ask," he asked. She answered what she could, which was not much more than she'd told him the first time. When he finished, she asked again. "Someone tried to kill Lucien Moreau," she said. "The attempt failed. I need to understand what that means for people adjacent to the situation." "Adjacent?" He let the word sit. "Is that what you'd call yourself?" "I'd call myself a surgeon who performed emergency surgery on a gunshot victim. That's the whole of it. But apparently that's enough for someone to take an interest." Silence on the line. She could hear Harrow working through it. What to give her, what to keep, where the line was between useful and compromising. She had the impression he was a careful man, the kind who had made a career out of patience. "There's a power struggle," he said finally. "Has been for about 18 months. Moreau's held the port contracts for decades, but there's a new organization moving into distribution. We don't have full identification yet. They've been pressuring his operations. The shooting Tuesday was the first direct attempt. A beat. Whoever did it, they missed. When these people miss, they don't typically accept the loss and walk away. They try again. They eliminate variables." She understood what he meant by variables. "Is there anything you can do?" she asked. "We can offer protection if you feel your safety is—" "I mean about Moreau." A long pause. "Dr. Voss, I'm going to give you a piece of advice that's not officially part of this conversation." "Go ahead." "Distance is the safest strategy, from all sides. These situations, they have a gravity to them. The closer you get, the harder it is to pull away." She thanked him. She hung up. She thought about the word gravity for a while. It was accurate. She could already feel it. Not fear exactly, more like the sense of standing on a slope and noticing, for the first time, how the ground tilted. The second kidnapping attempt happened on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week after the first surgery. She was 3 blocks from her building, walking from the parking garage because the elevator had been out for 2 days and she had given up waiting. It was cold. The street was not empty but not crowded, the particular in-between density of a weeknight in November when people were either home or in bars and the sidewalk was left to the purposeful. Two men stepped out of a doorway. She knew immediately, the way the body knows before the mind has processed, that this was not random. The way they positioned, one ahead, one angling from the right, was coordinated. The first one said something to her in a language she didn't recognize. The second one had his hand in his jacket. She had a heartbeat, maybe two, to make a decision. She stepped left toward the street because going backward would put her against the building, and that was the direction they wanted. She opened her mouth to scream, not from panic, from cold tactical calculation, because noise was the one thing they couldn't afford in a residential block. She got about half of a scream out before a third figure came from behind her, and she thought with awful clarity there were three of them, and then everything happened very fast. There was a sound of impact that wasn't her, a man going down hard, the specific weight of a body hitting pavement. Another impact, close, then a third. The hand in the jacket never cleared the fabric. Ilara pressed her back against a parked car and watched, because it was too fast to do anything else, as two men she had not seen materialized from the shadows and dismantled the situation with a precision that was almost mechanical. 30 seconds, maybe less. Three men on the ground. The two from the shadows standing, breathing hard but controlled, already scanning the street. Corvin stepped out of a doorway across the street and walked toward her without hurrying. "You're not hurt," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." Her voice came out level. She was furious about how level it came out, because her heart was hitting her ribs hard enough to feel it in her jaw. "You were following me." "Yes." "You've been following me all week." "Yes." She looked at the men on the ground. They were zip-tied, she realized. Her people had done it in the 30 seconds while she was processing what was happening. "Who are they?" "We'll find out." "I want to know." "I understand." He looked at her steadily. "Mr. Moreau would like to explain the situation to you in person. He thought you'd refuse. He appears to have been right that you would, and also right that events would eventually make refusal impractical." She stared at him. "He predicted this?" she said. He anticipated the escalation timeline. Something in his expression shifted. Not sympathy, but something adjacent to it. "He's been doing this a long time." "And me?" Her voice came out harder than she intended. "Did he factor me in as a variable too?" Corvin didn't answer immediately. She took that as a yes. "Get me out of here," she said. The estate was north of the city, far enough that the skyline became a glow behind them rather than a presence. She sat in the back of the black SUV. Not the same one from the hospital, or maybe exactly the same one, she couldn't tell, and watched the road and thought with the tight, concentrated focus she used when she needed to suppress the part of herself that was very close to frightened. The house, when they reached it, was not what she expected. She had built an image in her mind of something ostentatious, the kind of fortress money built when money wanted to announce itself. What she found instead was large but restrained. Stone, old trees, a drive that circled through dark grounds, the kind of place that didn't want to be looked at. She was brought through a side entrance. A woman in dark clothing took her coat without speaking. She was led down a corridor that was quietly expensive, not decorated exactly, more like furnished with the specific taste of someone who had spent a long time surrounded by objects and eventually learned which ones mattered. Lucien Moreau was sitting in a chair by a window when she was shown in. He looked worse than she had expected, for a man 2 weeks out of her OR. He was wearing a dark shirt with the top button open, and she could see the edge of the dressing on his left side through the fabric. He was pale, not hospital pale anymore. The particular gray pallor of someone running on willpower and pharmaceuticals past the point where the body had voted for bed. He looked, she thought, like someone who was pretending to be fine with more skill than feeling. He stood when she entered. A reflex, she thought. The kind of courtesy that was bone deep, installed early enough to survive everything that came after. "Dr. Voss." His voice was lower than she expected, rougher, not the voice of a man who gave speeches. "Sit down, please." "I'd rather stand." A pause. He sat back down, which she hadn't expected either. "Then stand, I won't argue the point." She stayed near the door, not retreating, but not closing the distance. "You've been having people follow me." For 3 days before the attempt tonight and every day since you left the hospital, yes. Without telling me. You'd refused all contact. I didn't have a mechanism for telling you that would have gotten through. So you just decided, on my behalf. I made a calculation. He didn't flinch from it. I was wrong not to find a way to inform you. I'm telling you now. She studied him across the room. He met it. His eyes were a very dark gray, and there was something in them that she couldn't categorize immediately. Not arrogance, not the entitled confidence she'd expected from a man who apparently controlled half of Chicago. More like the particular self-possession of someone who had lost enough things that they'd stopped being afraid of losing more. It sat on him strangely, that quality, like armor worn too long, starting to shape the body beneath it. The men tonight, she said. Who sent them? The Caver organization. They're based out of the Eastern Port facilities. They've been absorbing distribution networks for 18 months. A brief pause. My distribution networks. And they came after me because you saved my life. His voice was entirely flat when he said it. Not dramatic, just factual. In their read of the situation, you're either a weakness of mine to be exploited or a resource to be redirected. Either way, they want you not in my column. Elara processed this. She was aware of a very particular sensation, the feeling of a door closing behind her, quiet and final, in some architecture of her life she hadn't known existed until it was already shut. I want to go home, she said. I know. But you're going to tell me that's not safe. Not tonight, not the way things stand. He watched her carefully. I have a medical facility on the grounds. Staff quarters. You would have everything you need. Everything I need. She looked at him. I need my career, my patients, my life, which is at my hospital and my apartment and not here. I can arrange for your patients to be covered. Your chief of surgery will understand a family emergency. You've already spoken to my chief of surgery? Not yet. I would ask your permission first. She almost laughed. It came out wrong. Not funny, just the involuntary sound of someone absorbing something genuinely absurd. You'll ask permission to call my boss, but not to pay off my student loans? Something crossed his face. The loan was a poor decision on my part. I owed you something, and I didn't know how to calibrate it. You're right to be angry. I'm not angry, she said, which was not entirely true. I'm tired, and I'm trying to figure out what my options actually are. I'll tell you what they are, he said. You stay here, where my people can protect you, until I've resolved the situation. Or you go home tonight, and the men who came for you earlier send more, and I can't guarantee the second attempt fails as cleanly as the first. He paused. That's the honest version. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away. She had the strange, disorienting sense that she was being given information by a man who had decided, for reasons she didn't yet understand, to tell her the truth instead of what she wanted to hear. How long? She said. I don't know yet. Best estimate. Weeks. Possibly less if things move the way I intend. She crossed her arms. And if I refuse? What happens? A long pause. Then I have Corvin follow you anyway, and you know about it this time. He said it without apology. I'm not going to let you be used against me. I understand that's not your choice to make, and I regret that. But I'm not going to let it happen. The words landed with the specific weight of something irrevocable. Not a threat, or not only a threat. Something more complicated than that. A statement of the way things were, offered to her with the odd courtesy of honesty when a lie would have been easier. She thought about the street, the two men stepping out of the doorway, the hand in the jacket. She thought about the word variables. I want to see the medical facility, she said. He nodded once. Of course. And I want to call my own patients' families before any story goes to my chief. I decide what gets said about where I am. Agreed. And nobody comes into whatever room I'm given without knocking. No exceptions. Not your people, not you. Understood. She looked at him one more time, this gray-faced man in his careful house, with his hidden empire and his healing wound and his eyes that gave away less than she wanted them to. She was a surgeon. She read bodies, read damage, read the thing underneath the surface that the patient was trying to manage or hide. What she read in Lucien Moreau was more complex than she had room to process tonight, standing in his study in her coat, with her heart still not entirely steady from the street. But she read that he meant what he said, and she read that he was very, very tired. So was she. "One more thing," she said. "Yes, I'm not a guest and I'm not a prisoner. If I'm going to be here, I need to be told what's actually happening, all of it, not the version you'd tell someone you were trying to protect." He considered her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but a close relative of it. The look of a man who had expected a different kind of negotiation. "All right," he said quietly. "Starting tomorrow morning." "Starting tomorrow morning." She nodded. She followed the woman in dark clothing out of the study and down the corridor toward the medical wing, and the house closed around her like a hand. Behind her, she heard Lucien Moreau exhale once, slowly. The breath of a man releasing something he had been holding for longer than tonight. She did not turn back. She told herself she didn't need to know what that sound meant. She was already beginning to suspect that was a lie. She slept badly and woke before the house did. The room they had given her was at the end of the medical wing's residential corridor. A spare space, functional rather than decorated, with a single window that looked out over the dark grounds toward a tree line she couldn't see the end of. The bed was good. The pillow was wrong. She lay on her back in the dark for an hour before giving up, then sat at the small desk near the window and watched the sky change from black to the particular deep blue that happened about 40 minutes before actual dawn. She had a notepad. She always carried one, a reflex from residency when she'd written notes on anything available. She wrote nothing on it. She just held the pen and sat with the fact of where she was and let her mind run the numbers on it, the way she ran numbers on a difficult case, without flinching from what they added up to. She was in the estate of a man who controlled organized crime across half of Chicago. She was there because someone had tried to abduct her on a public street. She had agreed to stay, not because she had been forced, but because the alternative had been worse, and she was not, whatever else she was, someone who chose worse outcomes out of pride. That was what she told herself. She wasn't entirely convinced. At 6:15, she found the medical facility on her own, navigating the wing from memory based on the brief tour the night before. It was better than she expected. Surgical suite, 2 recovery beds, diagnostic equipment that was current rather than dated. The kind of setup that cost serious money and had been assembled by someone who took physical vulnerability seriously enough to prepare for it. She checked the medication inventory out of reflex and found it well stocked, thoughtfully organized. Whoever had put this together had done it with care. She was checking the expiration dates on the blood products when footsteps sounded in the corridor. It wasn't Lucien. It was a man she hadn't met. Late 50s, compact build, with thick gray hair and the particular kind of face that had once been handsome and had settled into something more interesting with age. He wore a jacket over a dark shirt and moved with a slight forward lean, the walk of someone perpetually in motion toward the next thing. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her and looked neither surprised nor unwelcoming. "You're up early." "I'm always up early." She turned back to the shelf. "Who are you?" "Renaud." He came into the room without waiting to be invited, which told her something about his standing here. "I run operations, logistics, personnel, the parts that keep the machine moving." He looked at the inventory she was checking. "Problem with the supplies?" "The O negative expires in 11 days. You'll want to order ahead." A pause. "I'll tell someone." "Tell me and I'll tell someone." She set the blood bag back on the shelf. "I'd rather know what's in this facility than have a gap when it matters." He studied her in a way that wasn't unfriendly. "Lucien said you'd want to run the medical side yourself." Lucien was right about that. He usually is, said without reverence, just the flat tone of someone reporting a statistical pattern. "He wants to meet with you at 8, if you're amenable." "I said I'd start getting information this morning. 8 is fine." Renaud nodded. He turned to go, then paused with his hand on the doorframe. There was something in the pause that felt constructed. A man deciding something in real time. "He doesn't bring people here," he said. "In 17 years, I've never seen him bring someone here who wasn't already in the organization." Alara looked at him. "Is that a warning?" "It's a fact." He left the doorframe and his footsteps moved away down the corridor, unhurried. She stood alone in the medical suite and thought about 17 years and what that number contained. Lucien was at a table in a small room off the main corridor. Not an office, more like a space between spaces, with windows on 2 sides and a pot of coffee already made. He looked like he had slept, which was more than she could say for herself. The color was slightly better in his face. He was holding a document when she came in and set it aside without apparent concern for her seeing it, or perhaps with the specific calculation that not hiding things was its own form of trust building. She poured coffee. She sat down across from him. "You said all of it," she said, "starting now." "Yes." He folded his hands on the table. "What do you want to know first?" "The Kavar organization, who they are, what they want, and why Tuesday night was the escalation it was," he told her. It took 20 minutes, and he told it the way she imagined he briefed his own people, direct, sequential, without elaboration for effect. The Kavar network had moved into Chicago from the eastern seaboard roughly 2 years ago, absorbing smaller operations the way a larger body of water absorbed tributaries. Their leadership was a man named Stefan Kavar, second generation, who had inherited a mid-level smuggling network and expanded it through a combination of strategic marriages, targeted violence, and the acquisition of port officials who could redirect cargo inspection. They had been working toward the Chicago port contracts for 18 months. Lucian's port contracts, specifically, the ones his family had held since his father had built the original relationships 40 years ago. "The shooting was meant to look like internal dissent," Lucian said, "one of my own people turning. If I died that night, the assumption would have been power struggle, and Kavar could have moved in while my organization was fractured." "But you didn't die." "No." A brief pause. "You made that difficult for them. So now they need to try again. And make it less clean this time, yes, which is why they're willing to use you as a tool. They don't need to kill you. They need to get me into a position where I'm responding to a threat rather than managing the situation." Elara drank her coffee. It was better than the hospital coffee, which was not a high bar. "You keep saying my people. How many people are we talking about?" "Directly employed, around 40. Extended network, significantly more." He said it without pride or apology. "The organization has been built over decades. It's not simple to dismantle from the outside." "Or from the inside?" He looked at her across the table. "What made you ask it that way?" She wasn't entirely sure. "Something Renault said." "What did Renault say?" "That you don't bring outsiders here." She held his gaze. "I'm wondering whether that's a problem for your people, having me here." A pause that lasted slightly too long. "Some of them have reservations. It's natural." "Reservations?" she repeated. "Or something more active than that?" He looked at her with that quality she kept encountering in him, the sense of a man who had decided to give her honesty rather than management. "Why do you ask?" "Because I'm a surgeon. I read people's physical responses before they know they're giving them. And when Renault told me you'd never brought an outsider here, his body was doing something his voice was keeping very quiet." She set her cup down. "He wasn't warning me about you. He was warning me about someone else." A longer pause this time. Lucian's jaw shifted slightly. It was the first involuntary physical response she had seen from him, and it was small enough that most people would have missed it. "I'll look into it," he said. "That's not the full answer." "No," he said. "It's not." But he didn't give her the full answer, and something told her that pushing right now would produce resistance rather than information. She filed it and moved forward. The first of his wounded arrived at 11 that morning. A man named Dax, mid-30s, with a forearm injury from the previous night's follow-on altercation. Corvin had taken a crew to track the men from the street, and it had not been an entirely clean operation. The wound was a deep laceration, not a bullet, badly closed in the field with the kind of amateur suturing that would have caused significant scarring and possible tendon damage if left as it was. Elara looked at the stitching, looked at Dax, and said, "Who did this to you?" "Guy on our crew. Does medical." "Does medical meaning what exactly?" "He knows the basics. He knows fewer basics than he thinks." She laid out her instruments. "I'm going to take these out and redo them. You'll need a local. Don't move." Dax looked at the ceiling while she worked. He had the kind of face that had absorbed significant damage over time and was no longer surprised by it. After a few minutes of silence, he said without inflection, "You're really a doctor." "Yes." "Not just Lucien's thing." She paused briefly. "I'm a trauma surgeon. This is my job. The circumstances that brought me here are separate from the job itself." She returned to the suturing. "Who told you I was Lucien's thing?" A long pause. "People talk." "What do they say?" "That you're the reason he's still breathing, and that he brought you here because he wants you close. He said it without judgment, just data. He brought me here because I was targeted, she said. Sure. He didn't seem unconvinced exactly, more like he didn't consider the distinction important. She finished the suturing. The work was clean. She was constitutionally incapable of leaving it otherwise. She dressed the wound, gave him antibiotic instructions, told him to come back in 3 days. He looked at the finished dressing with genuine surprise. That's a lot better, he said. Yes, she said. It is. He left. She cleaned the instruments. She thought about the word thing and what it meant in the architecture of this place, and what assumptions were already building around her presence that she was not aware of and could not control. The next 4 days established a rhythm she hadn't planned for. She saw 3 more patients, minor injuries from various confrontations, 1 infected wound that required debridement, and a course of IV antibiotics she was not fully equipped to administer properly, but managed. She updated the medical inventory. She ate meals that were brought to her in the medical wing, or twice, at a table in the kitchen where the household staff moved around her with the careful neutrality of people who had learned not to ask questions. Lucien came to the medical wing on the 2nd day to have his dressing changed. He sat on the examination table without complaint and let her work without trying to manage the encounter through conversation, which she found unexpectedly respectful. The wound was healing correctly. She had done good work and the tissue was responding as it should. You're ahead of schedule, she said. I have motivation. A brief pause. I have things that need attending. In about 10 days you can attend them without risking the repair. She taped the new dressing. Don't lift anything significant on the left side. Don't twist fast. If you feel heat around the wound site, come immediately. Don't wait to see if it resolves. Understood. She stepped back. He buttoned his shirt, slowly, and she found herself reading the gesture the way she always read physical tasks, looking for what it cost, where the compensation was happening. He was protecting the left side without being obvious about it, the kind of careful that became automatic. You've had injuries before, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Several. Several, he agreed with the tone of someone confirming an unremarkable fact. How many times has someone tried to kill you? He considered the question seriously, which she hadn't expected. Definitively? 4, probably? Closer to 7. And you're still here. And I'm still here. Something moved across his face. Not pride. More like the wry acknowledgement of a statistical improbability. It's not a record I'd recommend trying to set. She found herself almost smiling. She stopped it before it arrived. Go rest. Come back in 3 days. He went. She stood in the suite for a moment afterward, looking at the used dressing in the waste bin, and felt the particular unsettling sensation of a perception shifting without her permission. On the 5th day, she found the files. Not intentionally. She had been looking for updated patient records. She'd asked Corvin to send her whatever prior medical documentation existed for the regular members of the operation, so she wasn't working blind if an emergency came in. He had sent her a tablet with access to the relevant files. She was going through them when she found a folder that was not labeled with a name. She should not have opened it. She knew that. She opened it. It contained correspondence. Not medical. Operational. Emails, encrypted and then decrypted into plain text, which meant someone had wanted them readable for someone with access to this tablet. Or had made a mistake. The subject headers were in a code she didn't recognize, but the content, when she read it, was not in code at all. It was a conversation. Between 2 parties, with the sender identified only as a string of numbers and the recipient listed as an internal designation she didn't recognize. But the content described, in flat and specific language, the location of the estate, gate schedules, staff rotations, the medical wing layout, the timing of Lucian's habitual movements. The most recent message had a timestamp from 3 days ago. 3 days ago, she had been here. She sat very still for a moment. The tablet felt heavier than it should. She went back through the messages, reading them with the systematic focus she used on difficult charts, looking for the identifying thread. The sender was inside the estate. The gate schedules and staff rotations were not information available from outside. Someone with access to this compound had been feeding intelligence to a recipient she couldn't identify from the tablet's data. Not couldn't, wouldn't, not yet. She scrolled to the earliest message. 3 weeks ago, the day after the initial shooting, Whoever this was had been reporting since then, since before she arrived. She set the tablet down on the desk and stood. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that because her chest was doing something complicated that she needed to not let into her hands. She thought about what to do with this information. The rational sequence was, tell Lucian immediately. But the files were on a tablet Corvin had given her, which meant either Corvin didn't know they were there, a mistake, or Corvin had put them there deliberately for reasons she couldn't yet map. And Corvin was Lucian's most trusted operational contact, the man who had been shadow following her before she even knew she was being protected. The man who had materialized on that dark street and coordinated 30 seconds of controlled violence with the precision of long practice. If Corvin was the source, telling Lucian through Corvin got her nowhere. If Corvin wasn't the source, then someone else had access to this tablet. Either way, she was holding a piece of information that was acutely dangerous to hold and potentially more dangerous to deploy incorrectly. She picked the tablet back up and photographed the key messages with her personal phone, an instinct so quick she barely registered making the decision. Then she set the tablet back where it had come from and walked to the window. Outside, the grounds were gray and still. A man she recognized as one of the outer perimeter guards moved along the fence line at the predictable intervals she had started to notice without meaning to. She was already learning the rhythm of this place. That was a problem of its own. She needed to get to Lucian directly, not through Corvin, not through Renault. Directly, with the door closed and no one else in the room. She found him in the room off the main corridor at 4 in the afternoon. He was alone, which she had counted on based on the pattern she'd observed. He worked in that room in the late afternoon without staff. She knocked once, which she had told him would be her signal, and he said, "Come in." She closed the door behind her. He looked up from whatever he was reading and registered something in her face immediately. She could see him doing it, that same rapid assessment quality she recognized from people trained to read rooms. "What happened?" he said. She put her phone on the table in front of him. The photographed messages were on screen. "Someone inside this house has been reporting your movements and this estate's layout to an outside party," she said. "I found these on the medical tablet Corvin sent me, either by mistake or because someone put them there for me to find." He picked up the phone. He read. His face did something very controlled and very quiet, and she watched the control happen, the way a wave pulls back from shore before the next one comes. He read all of it. He set the phone down. "When did you find this?" he said. His voice was flat in a way that was different from his usual flatness. This was the flatness of something very hot with a lid clamped down over it. 2 hours ago." "You waited 2 hours." "I was deciding who to tell it to," she said. "And how?" He looked at her with the dark gray eyes. "And you decided to tell me directly. Not through Corvin, not through Renault. I don't know who this is yet, and I'm not walking the information past someone who might be the source of it." A long pause. He looked at the phone again. She could see him working through it. Not the emotional reaction, which he had set aside with a precision she found both impressive and faintly alarming, but the operational implications. Where this had been going. What it meant for the last 3 weeks. What it meant for whatever he was planning. "The gate schedule's in the second message," he said. "Those are Renault's rotation." "I know." "Which means Renault built them, or someone with access to Renault's files." "Yes." He was quiet for almost a full minute. She let it sit. She had learned in the last 5 days that his silences were working silences. They produced something, and interrupting them cost more than waiting. "There's a meeting tonight," he said finally. She had not known about a meeting. "Kavar's people reached out through an intermediary yesterday. They want to negotiate. They're calling it a negotiation, which in this context means they want to present terms for a transition that leaves them with the port contracts." He looked at her steadily. "I was going to refuse. But this," he touched the edge of her phone, "changes the operational picture. If someone here is feeding them intelligence, they already know I'd refuse, which means the negotiation is not a negotiation." The implication settled over her like cold water. "It's a setup," she said. "Most likely." He stood, which cost him something. She could see the left side compensation, and moved to the window. "If I go, I walk into whatever they've arranged. If I don't go, they know the leak was discovered, and they move the timeline up." "Is there a third option?" He turned from the window. There was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not uncertainty, exactly. More like the expression of a man who had run the calculations and arrived at an answer he didn't like. The third option, he said quietly, requires me to know who in this house sent those messages before tonight. She understood what he was asking before he said it. You want me to help you figure out who it is? You found the files, he said. You read people. You've been inside this compound for 5 days and you've been watching everything. I've seen you doing it. Every room you walk into, you take inventory. A pause. Tell me what you've seen. She thought about Renault's pause in the doorway, the too long beat before an answer, the way the warning had been aimed specifically at the idea of internal problems rather than external ones. She thought about Dax lying on her table, saying people talk. She thought about the rotation schedules in the messages and whose files they lived in, and the meeting tonight that was not a negotiation. I need you to do something for me first, she said. Tell me who knew about the meeting with Kavar before today. He looked at her very carefully. 3 people, Corvin, Renault, and a man named Seaver who handled the intermediary contact. Seaver, she repeated. He's been with the operation for 11 years. He manages external communications, third-party contacts, intermediaries. I trust him. A beat. I trusted him. She thought about 11 years, about how long it took to build trust and how quickly the architecture of it could fail once you knew where to look. The message timestamps, she said. They start 3 days after the shooting, not before. Yes. Which means whoever this wasn't working against you before the shooting. They started after. She held his eyes. After the attempt failed, after someone decided the direct approach wasn't going to work. Lucian went very still. They were turned, he said, after the shooting, not before. Which means Kavar got to someone here in the chaos of the aftermath, someone who was loyal until they had a reason not to be. She paused. What kind of reasons does Kavar offer? The question sat in the room between them. Money, he said. Protection. The survival of people they care about. He said the last part with a specific weight that told her it wasn't hypothetical. Seaver, she said. Does he have family? A long pause. A daughter. She's been living overseas for the last 2 years. He said it was for school. He stopped. We never verified. The silence that followed was the kind that contained a very large and very cold realization assembling itself in real time. She's not at school, Ilara said. No, Lucian said. She's probably not. He moved away from the window. He was very controlled. She was watching him the way she watched critical patients, looking for the tell of a system under more pressure than it could hold. He was close to the edge of something. Not collapse. This man did not collapse. She was already certain of that. But the edge of a decision that was going to cost him. I have to go to that meeting, he said. That's insane. If I don't go, Seaver reports back that I've discovered the leak, and they move against this compound tonight. 40 people here, including you. He turned to look at her directly. If I go, I know what I'm walking into. I can prepare for it. Prepare for what? An ambush? I've survived ambushes before. You have a repaired lung laceration, and you're 2 weeks out of surgery. I'm aware of that. She stared at him. Then you know how catastrophically bad this idea is. Yes, he said. I also know it's the one that protects the most people. He held her gaze, and there was something in it that was stripped down to the essential. No performance, no management, just the raw fact of a man who had lived in this world long enough to understand its math. I'm not asking you to agree with it. I'm telling you what I've decided. She looked at him for a long moment. The compound around them felt different now. The same walls, the same corridors, but something in the air had shifted, the way air pressure changes before a storm that hasn't arrived yet. I'm coming, she said. No. You're going to need a surgeon. I have people. People who stitch lacerations with fishing line and call it medical. She crossed her arms. You walk into that room and something goes wrong, you need someone who can keep you alive long enough to get back here. I'm the only person in this building qualified to do that. He stared at her. She stared back. It was, she thought distantly, possibly the strangest argument she had ever made in her career for accompanying a patient into a dangerous situation. This isn't your war, he said. No, she said. But apparently someone decided to make it mine the moment I put my hands in your chest. She uncrossed her arms. So let me finish what I started. The room was very quiet. Outside, the light was going gray, and somewhere in the estate, a man who had sold his loyalty for his daughter's safety was preparing to make a phone call that would set the night in motion, and Alara Voss stood in a room with the king of a burning empire and understood with complete, terrible clarity that she had already crossed every line she had drawn for herself, and that the only direction left was forward. They left at 8:15. 2 vehicles, Lucien in the first with Corvin driving and 2 others in the back. Men. Lucien had selected himself quietly without going through Renault or Seaver, pulling them aside one at a time over the hour before departure and giving them instructions in low voices that Alara was not close enough to hear. She rode in the second vehicle with Dax and a woman named Petra she had not met before, compact and dark-haired with a stillness about her that suggested she was the most dangerous person in the car. Alara had a medical bag in her lap. She had packed it herself. Field dressings, hemostatic gauze, IV supplies, morphine in a locked case with the key around her wrist, 2 units of O-negative from the facility that were not yet expired. She had done it methodically, without letting her hands shake, with the same checklist focus she used before a difficult surgery when the outcome was not guaranteed and the margin for error was very small. Petra watched her pack it without comment. As they pulled out of the estate gates, she said, "You ever done field work?" "Not like this," Alara said. "Then stay behind me, whatever happens." "I'll stay where I'm useful." Petra looked at her for a moment with the eyes of someone recalibrating an estimate. Then she turned back to the window. The meeting location was a warehouse complex in the Southport district, the particular geography of the city's industrial edge, where the lake was close enough to smell but not close enough to see, and the buildings were built to hold cargo rather than people. Lucien had been here before, clearly. He gave Corvin the route without consulting anything, and Corvin drove it with the quiet efficiency of a man following a path already memorized. Alara watched the city change outside the window. The lit districts gave way to the darker industrial zones, streetlights further apart, less traffic. The night was clear and very cold, and the warehouses they passed were the kind of large that absorbed light rather than reflected it. She thought about Seaver. Before they left, Lucien had called him in. She had not been in the room for it. Lucien had asked her to wait in the corridor, a request she had respected because the conversation that needed to happen was not hers to witness. She had heard almost nothing through the door. 2 minutes of quiet, and then a single sound that might have been a chair moving, and then quiet again. Seaver had not come out. When Lucien emerged, his face was arranged in the careful neutral. She was beginning to read as the expression he wore when something had cost him something he wasn't prepared to show. He had said only, "His daughter is in a facility outside of Bratislava. Kavar's people have had her for 4 months." A pause. He didn't know that the messages were being used to set up tonight. He thought he was buying time. "Is she alive?" Alara had asked. As of last contact, yes. He had moved past her down the corridor. It doesn't change the situation. She hadn't argued with that. She understood it, not as coldness, but as the math of it. The situation was what it was, regardless of how it had been assembled. What she had not told him, as they walked to the vehicles, was that she had sent one more message before leaving. From her personal phone to Detective Harrow's number, a text that said only, "Southport Warehouse District, tonight, Kavar Organization. I think you know what this means." She hadn't signed it. She hadn't waited for a response. She had put the phone in her coat pocket and gotten in the car and not mentioned it to anyone. She didn't know if it was the right call. She knew it was a call she needed to make. The warehouse was lit inside. They could see it from 2 blocks away, a glow through the high windows, the particular industrial yellow of work lighting. Lucien's vehicle stopped first, and Alara's stopped behind it. She watched through the windshield as Lucien got out, unhurried, and stood for a moment looking at the building with the particular quality of someone reading a situation through their skin. Corvin moved up beside him. They exchanged something low. Corvin's head moved in a micro-nod. Then Lucien turned and looked at Alara's vehicle. She got out before he could tell her to stay. He looked at the medical bag on her shoulder. He looked at her face. He said nothing, which she took as permission, and fell in at the edge of the group as they moved toward the warehouse entrance. The door was open. Not unlocked. Open, standing ajar, The way you left a door when you wanted to signal that whoever was inside was expecting you. Warm air pushed through it, the smell of oil and metal and something chemical underneath. Ilara's pulse was doing something she noticed the way she noticed a patient's monitor. Present, registered, set aside. Inside. The space was large and mostly empty. Cleared for this, recently, she could tell by the absence of dust in certain areas and the presence of it in others. High ceiling, concrete floor, the structural bones of a working warehouse stripped down to a meeting room by the removal of whatever had occupied it. Lighting from portable work lamps positioned at the corners, which meant the center of the space was brighter than the edges. In the center, a table. Metal, folding, the kind that had no pretensions. 6 chairs. 3 on each side. On the far side of the table, already seated, 3 men. The one in the center was Stefan Kavar. She knew him immediately, not because she had seen photographs, she hadn't, but because he had the particular presence of someone who had spent decades in rooms where everyone else was aware of his authority. Late 50s, heavy-set but not soft, with close-cropped silver hair and the face of a man who had learned to keep his expressions at roughly the temperature of room-temperature water. Not cold, not warm, ambient. Beside him, on his left, a man she didn't recognize, younger, with the restless alertness of an operational lieutenant. On his right, a woman in a dark coat who sat with her hands on the table and her eyes fixed on Lucien from the moment he walked in. Lucien crossed the floor without hesitating. He pulled out a chair on his side of the table and sat. Corvin sat beside him. The third chair on their side remained empty. Ilara stayed near the wall, 15 feet back. Dax and Petra bracketed her without making it obvious. The warehouse had other exits. She had clocked them on the way in, the reflex of someone who had learned in the last 2 weeks to locate the ways out of any space she entered. Lucien. Kavar's voice was deep and carried easily in the large space. He sounded like a man who was genuinely glad to see someone, which was exactly the most dangerous way to sound. I'm glad you came. You gave me a date and a location, Lucien said. I came to hear what you have to say. That's all I'm asking. Kavar spread his hands on the table. An open gesture, practiced. We've been circling each other for 2 years. Men have died. Operations have been disrupted. None of that is good for either of us. Speak for yourself on the disruption. A brief smile. Fair. You've held your ground better than I expected. A pause, the kind with texture in it. But you're tired, Lucien, I can see that. You've been holding something together for a long time and it costs. I know what that costs. He leaned forward slightly. What I'm offering tonight is an end to it. A clean division. You keep your existing import infrastructure, your northern distribution. We take the port contracts moving forward. No more escalation. Lucien was quiet for a moment. His hands rested on the table, still, which Ilara had learned was the position he defaulted to when he was most in control of himself. The port contracts, he said, have been in my family's operation for 40 years. 40 years is a long time to hold anything. A slight tilt of Kavar's head. Nothing holds forever. No, Lucien agreed. It doesn't. A pause. The shooting 3 weeks ago, was that your opening offer? The temperature in the room dropped a degree. Kavar looked at him without moving. That was a miscalculation by someone who has since been corrected. Corrected, Lucien said. Interesting word. He glanced toward the far end of the warehouse, toward the deep shadow past the work lamps. A glance that lasted exactly 1 second, and then returned to Kavar. How many people did you bring tonight? A pause. This is a conversation, Kavar said. Yes. Lucien's voice did not change at all. How many? A silence that lasted long enough to become its own answer. Ilara felt it before she processed it. A shift in air pressure, almost. The particular sensation of a situation-changing state. Her hand found the strap of the medical bag. Her eyes went to the edges of the warehouse, to the darkness past the lamps, and she saw it. Movement. Not dramatic. Just the specific stillness of people trying not to be seen, which was itself a kind of visibility if you were looking for it. There were more than 3 of them on Kavar's side. There were significantly more. She started to say something, but Lucien was already standing. On your feet. His voice cracked across the space. Not a shout, something harder than a shout. A command with no air in it. Now! For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. The lights went out. Not all of them. The work lamps stayed on, but something killed the overhead strips, dropping the warehouse into a patchwork of bright pools and absolute darkness. And the darkness was where Kavar's additional people had been standing. Alara dropped to a crouch instinctively, the medical bag hitting the floor with her, her shoulder against the wall. Dax's hand grabbed her arm. Not gentle, not rough, just a physical anchor in the sudden chaos. Gunfire. Short, sharp bursts from the far end of the warehouse, and return fire from Lucian's people. And the particular chaos of a room where violence is happening and the geography has been disrupted by darkness. And Alara could not see Lucian and could not see Corvin, and her heart was hitting her sternum with a force that she felt in her back teeth. "Move," Dax said, low and close to her ear. "Left wall, toward the door." She moved, low, fast, the bag in hand, keeping the wall at her shoulder. The sound of gunfire was disorienting in the large space. It came from multiple directions and echoed and made it impossible to locate anything with precision. She nearly went down when her foot caught something. A floor drain, the metal grate edge, caught herself on the wall and kept moving. The door was 20 feet ahead. The pale rectangle of the outside dark, less dark than inside, enough to aim for. Then Petra materialized out of the shadows to her left, moving backward, keeping something between her and the center of the room, and Alara understood that Petra had been covering the approach from the far side. Petra's breathing was hard and fast. "The car," Petra said. "Not yet." Alara stopped. "Where's Lucienne?" "In there." "I need—" "The car, doctor." Petra's voice was completely flat. "Lucienne's orders before we came in. If it goes sideways, you go to the car. If it goes sideways, he's going to need— now." Alara looked at her. Petra had a gun in her right hand and her left arm pressed close to her side, and Alara registered with the part of her brain that never stopped working that the arm was damaged. Not bleeding visibly, but held in the particular guarded way of a shoulder injury, joint rather than tissue, and the pain of it was in Petra's jaw and the tight set of the muscle there. "Your shoulder," Alara said, "doesn't matter. Your trigger control is going to degrade in about 4 minutes when the muscle spasm—" "I know," Petra said, and something in her voice shifted, the flatness cracking slightly at the edge. "I know. Now will you please get to the car so I can do my job?" Alara went. Outside, the cold hit her like a wall and she breathed it in. Gun smoke and cold lake air, the smell of the port district, exhaust from the running vehicles. She reached the second car and got in and sat with the medical bag on her knees and listened to the sound of the warehouse and thought with complete focus about what she needed and what she had. 2 units of O-negative, hemostatic gauze, suture kit, morphine. The one thing she did not have that she might need was a chest tube, and she had not packed one because she had not let herself think they would be doing thoracic work in a car in the Southport district, and she was now revising that assessment with significant urgency. 4 minutes. 5. The firing inside the warehouse had become intermittent, single shots rather than bursts, which meant either it was nearly over or someone was being very careful with ammunition. She could not determine which. Then the warehouse door came open, and 2 of Lucian's men came out supporting a third between them, and the third was Corvin, and Corvin was walking but wrong, one leg taking the weight and the other dragging, and his face was white and tight with something he was not making sound about. They got him to the car. She was already moving before the door opened. "Let me see," she said. "Keep driving," Corvin said to the driver. "Not until I see." She was already cutting the fabric of his trouser leg with the scissors from her bag. The wound was mid-thigh, lateral, a through and through. She could see both entry and exit, and the blood was bright red and fast, and she felt the bottom of her stomach drop, because that color and that rate meant arterial involvement, and that meant she had minutes, not the comfortable window she would have had with Venus. "Corvin, talk to me." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You have an arterial bleed in your thigh. Dax—" She looked up. "Hold his leg steady. Don't let him move it." She pulled hemostatic gauze and pressed it in, hard, and Corvin made a sound through his teeth that he had clearly tried to suppress and failed. "I know," she said. "Keep making that sound if you need to. It doesn't bother me. I need you to stay very still." She held pressure. Her hands were covered in blood to the wrists in 30 seconds. She could feel the pulse of it through the gauze, rapid, urgent, the insistence of a system that did not know it was running out of what it was running on. She pressed harder. Corvin's hand came down on top of hers, not pushing her away, just gripping, the reflex of a person in severe pain finding something to hold on to. "Where's Lucien?" he said. "Still inside." A pause that cost him something. "He'll come out." "I know he will." She didn't know that. She said it the way she said things to patients in critical moments. Not dishonestly, but with the particular authority of someone who understood that certainty was sometimes the most useful tool available. "Stay with me." The warehouse door opened again. Lucien came through it, walking on his own. That was the first thing she registered, and the relief of it moved through her fast and then was gone because she was working, and relief was a feeling she would have later. He was moving wrong, though. The left side compensation was more pronounced than it had been, and there was something in his gait that told her the 2 weeks of surgical repair had taken damage tonight. He got in the front. "Drive," he said. The car moved. "Lucien." She did not look up from Corvin's leg. "Are you hit?" A pause. "Grazed," he said. "Where?" "Left side." Her jaw tightened. "The surgical site." "Adjacent." "That means yes." She kept pressure on Corvin's thigh with her left hand and reached into the bag with her right for the flashlight. "I need to see it. Corvin first. I'm managing Corvin. I can manage 2 things." She looked up briefly. In the front seat, Lucien had his right hand pressed against his left side, and his face had the color she remembered from her OR table 3 weeks ago, the wax pale of someone whose body was directing resources away from the surface. "Left side, open your shirt." He did it without arguing, which told her more about his condition than any visual assessment would. She looked at what she could see in the moving dark of the car. The dressing she had applied 3 days ago, dark now, the tape lifting at one edge. The original wound site was below this, but the new damage was above it, and she could see from here that above it was worse than he had said. "That's not a graze," she said. "It's not deep." "It's deep enough to reopen the pleural repair." His jaw tightened. He said nothing. "How long ago?" 20 minutes approximately. 20 minutes of controlled movement and no complaint, and she understood now why his breathing had a quality to it that she had read as effort rather than damage. He had been managing the breath sounds, managing the rate, keeping it functional through sheer decision. She had seen patients do this in shock, run on will past the point where the body would have chosen differently. It never lasted as long as they thought it would. "We're going back to the estate," she said. "I know. I'm going to need the OR suite the moment we get there." "It'll be ready." He paused. "Corvin." "I've got him." She did have him. The bleeding had slowed under sustained pressure, the hemostatic material doing its work. And Corvin was still conscious, still making small sounds at intervals that told her he was present. "He needs a hospital OR for the arterial repair. I can stabilize him, but I can't fix the vessel in the field suite. Then we get him to the hospital after you stabilize." A pause. "After." She understood what after meant. After her. After the more critical patient. She looked at Corvin. He was looking at the ceiling of the car, breathing slowly, conserving. He understood it too. "After," Corvin said. His voice was thin but steady. The estate was 22 minutes from the warehouse at the speed they drove. Alara used 19 of those minutes on Corvin's leg, and 3 of them watching Lucien's breathing pattern and doing calculations she didn't share with anyone in the car. The pattern was wrong in the way she had feared. Shallow on the left, the chest wall compensating, the body already doing the work of protecting a lung that was compromised again. The gates opened before they reached them. Someone had called ahead. Inside, 2 of the household staff met them at the side entrance. The woman who had taken her coat on the first night, and a younger man she had seen in the kitchen. She directed them with the compact efficiency of a person who had done this in worse conditions than this. "Corvin to the recovery room. Left leg elevated. Keep this pressure dressing in place. Do not remove it for any reason until I come in. If his pressure drops and he becomes unresponsive, come get me immediately." She looked at the younger man. "You understand?" "Yes." "Say it back." He did. She moved. Lucien was already in the surgical suite when she pushed through the door. He had gotten himself up onto the table, which should not have been possible, and was only possible because he had decided it would be. He was sitting rather than lying, which told her the supine position was compromising his breathing. "Sit-up angle," she said. 30 degrees. She hit the controls on the table to adjust it. "Stay there." She scrubbed fast, faster than ideal, clean enough to matter. She pulled the supply cart to position. The suite was well lit, and the equipment was where she had cataloged it, and she moved through the preparation with the tunnel vision focus that was her best professional attribute. And tonight was also the only thing standing between this man and the particular finality that came from a repaired lung being asked to do too much too soon. She pulled back the dressing. The grazing bullet had caught him at the lateral chest wall, 3 inches above the original entry site. A long furrow rather than a penetrating wound, but deep enough to compromise the intercostal tissue, and she could see now from his oxygen saturation reading, deep enough to have reopened the pleural space slightly. Air where air should not be. The original repair was intact. That was the one piece of good news available, and she took it. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I'm aware of the general principle," he said. She worked. It was not clean the way OR work was clean. It was close and difficult, and she was working without a second surgeon and without the full suite of equipment she would have in a real OR, using what she had, substituting where she had to, making decisions in real time that she would have had 45 seconds to think through in a proper theater and had 3 seconds to think through here. She put in a needle decompression first to relieve the pneumothorax. Lucien made a sound she felt in her own chest and then stopped making sounds, which was its own kind of courage, or stubbornness, or both. His oxygen saturation began climbing within 90 seconds. She watched the number on the portable monitor and kept her eyes moving between the number and the wound and his face. "Talk to me," she said. "Why?" "Because your voice tells me if you're losing ground." A pause. "What do you want me to say?" "Anything. What happened in the warehouse after we got out?" He talked. She worked. His voice was rough and thin, and she tracked it with the part of her attention that wasn't occupied with tissue and instrumentation, monitoring it the way she monitored a secondary vital. He told her what had happened, tersely, with the factual economy of someone reporting rather than narrating. Kavar had underestimated the preparation Lucien had made in the hour before departure, the quiet conversations with the selected men. The ambush had not gone the way it was designed to go. Kavar was alive. Lucien had made a decision not to resolve the situation that way, for reasons he stated without elaboration. The Kavar lieutenant was not. Several other men were not. "Kavar got out," she said. "Yes. So this isn't over." "Not tonight." A carefully measured breath. "But the landscape changed. He used his primary resource and it failed. He'll need time to rebuild the operational capacity for another attempt." "How much time?" "Enough." His voice was slightly stronger now. The oxygen saturation was climbing, the acute crisis moving toward managed. "Enough for what I'm planning." She closed the wound in layers. It took 38 minutes from first incision to final dressing, which was fast and not ideal, and was the best available option in a room that was not designed for this kind of work. She checked the saturation reading again. 94% better, not where she wanted it, but moving in the right direction. "Breathe for me," she said. "Slow, all the way." He breathed. She listened to the left side with the stethoscope. Better than 20 minutes ago. Not whole, not the clean bilateral sound of an intact chest, but present, functional, the lung doing the work it was supposed to do. She pulled the stethoscope off. She set it on the cart. She looked at him. He was looking at her in the way he sometimes did, the way she had first noticed in this room, when she was changing his dressing and she had thought the look was assessment. She understood now that it was something else, something she had been not naming for several days because naming it felt premature and also because the last week had not given her a great deal of time for anything that wasn't immediate survival. "You'll live," she said. "You keep managing that," he said. "I'm starting to think you do it on purpose." Something crossed his face. The closest thing to a genuine expression she had seen from him, a half thing, there and gone. "Go check Corvin." "I will." She didn't move yet. "When we get through this, when you've done whatever you're planning, what happens to Seaver's daughter?" He was quiet for a moment. His eyes didn't move from her face. "I'm going to get her back," he said, "whatever it costs." She looked at him. "You mean that?" I rarely say things I don't mean. It's inefficient. She stood at the edge of the table in her bloody gloves with the cold clarity of the suite around her and thought about inefficiency and what it meant that a man who ran a criminal organization had used that word to describe sincerity. And she thought about the way the night had moved, and she thought about a text message she had sent to a detective before they left and had not yet told anyone about. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. He waited. "Before we left tonight, I contacted the police detective who interviewed me after the hospital, Harrow. I told him the location and Kavar's name." The room went very still. Lucien did not move. His expression did not change in any obvious way, but something in the quality of his stillness shifted, became the specific stillness of a man receiving information that required significant internal recalibration. "You contacted the police," he said. "Yes." "Without telling me?" "Yes." She held his eyes. "Because I didn't know if we were coming back, and I needed someone outside this situation to know what was happening. I needed a failsafe that wasn't part of your organization." A long silence. "Harrow," he said. "Do you know what he is?" She looked at him. "A detective." "He's Kavar's contact inside the department," Lucien said quietly. "He's been feeding the Kavar organization police intelligence for 8 months. The blood in her hands felt very cold. "The corrupt law enforcement," she said slowly. "You knew about it." "I've known for 6 weeks." His voice was even. "I was building the evidence to expose him. It's part of what I'm planning." A pause. "The text you sent told Kavar's inside man exactly where we were going tonight and who I believe is responsible." She stood very still. "Which means," she said. "Which means," he said, "that Kavar knows the leak was discovered, knows we found the messages, knows Seaver was the source." A pause that held the full weight of what came next. "And knows we survived tonight." She looked at him. He looked at her. "He'll move on the estate," she said. "Yes." Lucien's voice was very quiet. "Tonight, most likely, before we can regroup." He shifted slightly on the table. She could see the cost of it, and reached for his phone. "We have perhaps 2 hours." Outside the surgical suite, somewhere in the estate, she could hear the sound of the house preparing, doors, footsteps, the particular urgency of a structure moving from rest to alert, like a body responding to a threat signal it hadn't been given time to see coming. 2 hours. She looked at her bloody hands. She looked at the man on the table in front of her, with his repaired lung and his careful mind and his empire that was burning at the edges. And she understood with the absolute clarity of a person who has run out of all other options that the next 2 hours were going to require everything she had ever learned about keeping people alive under conditions that were not designed for surviving. She stripped off the gloves. She went to the sink. She washed her hands with the speed of someone who did not have time for the ritual but was doing it anyway, because some habits were the difference between infection and survival was the only item on the agenda that mattered now. "Tell me what you need," she said. Lucien looked at her for one moment, a look that carried something she still could not quite name, something that had been building across the days in this house and the hours of this night and the particular intimacy of two people who had now, twice, stood at the same knife edge between what ends and what continues. "I need you to be ready," he said. She turned from the sink. "I've been ready," she said, "since the first night." And in the corridor outside, the first alarm began to sound. The alarm was not loud. That was the first thing she registered. It was not the screaming klaxon of a hospital fire drill or the wail of a municipal siren. It was a tone, low and sustained, the kind of sound designed to alert without panicking, and it moved through the estate's walls the way a current moves through water, everywhere at once, immediate, impossible to locate and impossible to ignore. Lucien was off the table before she could stop him. "You cannot," she started. "I'm upright," he said. "That's enough for now." It was not enough. She could see that clearly. The oxygen saturation monitor still clipped to his finger reading 92. The left side compensation still visible in every breath he took. The particular gray at the edges of his face that she had learned to read as the body's honest report card when the mind was insisting on override. But he was moving, and she had learned enough about him in the past 2 weeks to understand that stopping him physically was not a realistic option, and that arguing would cost time she did not have. She grabbed the portable monitor off the cart and took it with her. In the corridor, the house had transformed. It was the only word for it. The same hallways, the same stone floors and quiet lighting, but inhabited differently now, with a purposeful urgency that had replaced the estate's usual controlled stillness. Petra was at the end of the corridor with her shoulder strapped. Someone had done a field wrap on it while Ilara was in the OR, tight enough to stabilize the joint, not tight enough to cut circulation. And she was giving rapid instructions to two men Ilara recognized from the grounds. They split off, and she turned and saw Lucien and came toward them with an expression that tried to be neutral and did not fully succeed. "North perimeter," she said to Lucien. "Motion sensors at the tree line. 4 separate contacts, maybe more. They're staging." "How long?" 20 minutes to breach if they move now. They're not moving yet." "They're waiting for something," Lucien said. He was leaning very slightly against the wall, not obviously, just enough that Ilara clocked it. Confirmation that the alarm went off. "They want to know the house is aware." Petra looked at him. "Why would they want that?" "Because this isn't the assault. This is the diversion." His jaw tightened. The real approach is somewhere else. A silence that lasted 2 seconds and contained a significant recalibration. "The medical wing," Ilara said. Both of them looked at her. "It's the least defended part of the compound," she said. "Corvin is in recovery there. If someone on the inside told them the layout, and they had the layout, we know they had the layout. They know the medical wing has one entry point and opens onto the east garden." She looked at Lucien. "They're not coming for the house. They're coming for you specifically, and I'm the one who knows where you are." A beat of silence. "Move Corvin," Lucien said to Petra. "Main house, interior room. Do it now." He looked at Ilara. "You go with No." She said it flat and did not add anything to it. He looked at her. She looked back. "The medical wing has the blood supply," she said, "and the surgical equipment. If tonight goes wrong in any direction, that room is the difference between people surviving and people not surviving. I'm staying where the tools are." Another beat. She could see him processing it. The operational logic of it, which was sound, against the instinct that was something else, something she had been watching develop in him across the days in this house, and had been carefully not naming. "Dax," he said. The man materialized from the corridor shadow, the way Lucien's people always seemed to. Present the moment they were needed, as though the name itself summoned them. "You stay with her, or you don't leave that room, not for any reason." Dax nodded. Lucien looked at her one more time. It was not a long look. It was the kind of look that carried more than it displayed, and she received it and stored it for later, for after, if after arrived. Then he moved down the corridor, and the house swallowed him. Ilara went back to the medical wing. She checked Corvin first. He was being moved, awake and unsteady but functional, complaining quietly about the indignity of being carried, which she took as a positive cognitive indicator. She checked the pressure dressing on his thigh, confirmed the bleeding was controlled, told the 2 men assisting him that the leg could not be allowed to hang, and let them go. Then she stood in the center of the surgical suite and took stock. What she had: the O-negative units, the surgical equipment, the medications, the portable monitor, the hemostatic supplies she'd partially depleted on Corvin's thigh. What she did not have: a second surgeon, anesthesia support, a viable evacuation route, or any meaningful ability to influence what was happening outside this room. What she did have was the room itself, and the knowledge of what was in it, and 14 years of training that had taught her that the space between a person and the worst outcome was usually smaller than it looked and larger than it felt, and that the job was always to close it. She moved the supply cart against the wall, out of the primary floor space. She checked the OR light, confirmed the backup power was live. She pulled a second IV line and primed it, hanging it from the portable stand, ready. She did all of this with the steady hands of a person who had learned to convert fear into motion, and she was almost finished when Dax, stationed at the door, said quietly, "East Garden." She went still. Through the high window above the scrub sink, she could see the top of the garden wall, and above it the tree line, dark against a sky that was that particular blue-black of a clear November night. She could see nothing specific, but she heard it. Not gunfire, not yet, but the specific quality of silence that preceded it, the held-breath silence of a situation about to exhale. "How many?" she said. "Can't tell." Dax's hand was on the door, not opening it. "More than I'd like." "Helpful," she said, and went back to the IV line. The next 12 minutes were the longest she had experienced since the operating room 3 weeks ago. She worked in the medical suite and listened to the house and did not allow herself to go to the window. Dax stayed at the door. Twice she heard sounds she could not identify and processed them and filed them and kept working. The third time she heard a sound she could identify. A single shot, close, from the east side of the building. She looked at Dax, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing useful to say. Then 2 more shots. Then a sustained exchange that lasted approximately 90 seconds and stopped. Silence. She stood at the supply cart with a roll of surgical tape in her hand and waited. The door to the medical wing opened. It was not Dax who opened it. He was still at the interior door, the one connecting to the main building. This was the exterior access, the one she had noted on her first night as the vulnerability. It opened with controlled force, and 2 men came through it, and Alara had exactly 1 second to register that they were not Lucian's people before one of them had crossed the room and grabbed her arm. Not rough. Deliberate. The grip of someone executing a specific instruction rather than expressing violence. Dr. Voss, the man said. He was calm in a way that was more frightening than aggression would have been. You're coming with us. I'm not going anywhere, she said. You are, he said. Mr. Kavar wants to speak with you. Dax moved. She heard him from behind her. Fast, controlled, the sound of a trained person engaging. And then the sound of the second man responding and a struggle that was brief and wrong-ended. And when she turned, Dax was down, not dead. She could see his chest moving, but down, with the second man standing over him. She looked at the man holding her arm. She looked at the medical suite around her. She made a calculation. Fine, she said. I'll go. They took her out through the east garden and along the wall to a vehicle she hadn't seen from the window. The night was very cold. She was in her surgical scrubs with no coat, and the cold went through the fabric immediately, and she focused on the sensation the way she sometimes focused on physical discomfort during long procedures, using it as an anchor, a point of presence. She had the portable monitor in her left hand. She had grabbed it off the cart when the man grabbed her arm, a reflex so automatic she hadn't registered making the decision. He hadn't told her to put it down. She kept it. The vehicle was an SUV, already running. She was put in the back. The man who had taken her arm sat beside her. The second man, the one who had handled Dax, got in front. The vehicle moved. They drove for 8 minutes. She tracked direction by instinct and counted seconds and kept her breathing even, because her breathing was the one variable entirely under her control, and she intended to control it. The destination was another warehouse, different from the first, smaller, closer to the lake, with the particular smell of long-term storage and cold concrete. She was brought inside and down a corridor and into a room that had been set up as a rough office, a table, several chairs, a standing lamp. The kind of improvised command space that people who moved frequently and planned for contingencies learned to assemble quickly. Stefan Kavar was standing when she came in. He looked at her for a moment, then at the monitor in her hand. "Sit down," he said. Not unkindly. She sat because sitting was tactically preferable to standing in an enclosed space where she was outnumbered, and sitting also put her closer to the table, which was a surface, and surfaces were useful. "You're a practical woman," Kavar said. He sat across from her. "I respect that." "What do you want?" she said. "The same thing I've wanted for 2 years." He folded his hands. "For Lucian Moreau to step back. The difference is that now I'm asking through you rather than through more direct methods, because the direct methods have become expensive." "I'm a surgeon," she said. "I don't negotiate on anyone's behalf." "You saved his life. Twice, by my understanding." He studied her. "In my experience, people don't do something twice unless they have a significant interest in the outcome. I have a significant interest in all my patients surviving." "Of course." He tilted his head. "He'll come for you. You understand that. Tonight, whatever's happening at the estate, he'll resolve it, and then he'll come for you. And when he does, I want you to give him a message." "A message," she said. "Tell him there's a third option. Not war, not capitulation. A structural agreement. He retains the import infrastructure, the northern networks, the relationships his father built. We take forward operations, new contracts, expansion, the port direction going forward. A clean division that leaves both operations intact." He paused. "Tell him I'll give him 7 days to consider it." She looked at him across the table. He was a man who had spent decades in the same world as Lucian. The same calculations, the same costs, the same kind of tired that came from carrying weight. No one outside that world could see. She could read it on him the way she read accumulated damage on a body. It was in the set of his shoulders and the particular flatness around his eyes of someone who had stopped expecting things to be clean. And if he says no, she said, then we return to what we've been doing, which has already cost both sides significantly. He held her gaze. I'm not offering terms of surrender. I'm offering an end to a war that neither of us started and both of us are tired of. She was quiet for a moment. Seaver's daughter, she said. Something moved across his face. She's safe. I want her released. Dr. Voss, before I deliver any message, before any agreement, she goes home. She kept her voice level. That's not a negotiation point, that's the condition. A silence that was longer than comfortable. You're not in a position to... I'm in the only position that matters, she said. You need me to deliver the message. Lucian trusts me in a way he won't trust a go-between, and you know that, or you wouldn't have brought me here. So the message comes with a condition, or it doesn't come at all. She held his gaze. The girl goes home first. Kavar looked at her for a long moment. She did not look away. She was aware of the men in her peripheral vision, the door behind her, the cold coming through the concrete walls. She was aware of how much she was risking, and she was also aware, with the clarity that came to her in the worst moments, that she was right, and that being right was the only ground she had to stand on. He exhaled slowly. 24 hours, he said. She'll be on a flight in 24 hours. I want confirmation before I leave this room. Another pause. He reached for the phone in his jacket. He made a call, in a language she didn't speak, brief and flat and authoritative. He set the phone on the table. It's arranged, he said. She nodded once. Then I'll deliver your message. They brought her back to the estate at 2 in the morning. The east garden was lit now. Additional lights had been deployed along the perimeter, and 3 of Lucien's people were visible at the garden wall when the vehicle dropped her at the exterior entrance. One of them was Petra, arms still strapped, who looked at her with an expression that contained significant relief and zero intention of displaying it. Inside, Petra said. He's been... She stopped. Inside. Lucien was in the medical suite. He was standing, not sitting, which told her the lung was holding. A person with compromised respiratory function didn't choose to stand when they could sit. He was also on the phone, speaking in the low, rapid shorthand she had heard him use when things were moving fast, and he ended the call the moment she came through the door. He looked at her the way she had looked at patients coming back from situations they should not have survived, the specific inventory of a person checking for damage before they were ready to feel relief. You're not hurt, he said. No. Dax. Concussion. He needs a CT to rule out. She set the monitor down on the cart. He needs a hospital, but he'll be ambulatory. He's not critical. She looked at Lucien. Kavar wants to talk. I know. He has a proposal. I know that too. He crossed the room and handed her a tablet. On the screen was a photograph. A young woman, dark-haired, sitting on a cot in a room that was clearly not a comfortable one, but was not a cell either. She was holding a phone. The timestamp on the photograph was 47 minutes ago. Seaver's daughter, Lucien said. Kavar released the location 20 minutes ago. My people are picking her up. A pause. How did you manage that? She looked at the photograph. I made it a condition. He was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not the subtle micro-adjustments she had spent 2 weeks learning to read, but something larger and less controlled, something that had been building behind the careful management of his face and had run out of room to stay hidden. I need to sit down, he said. It came out with the particular flatness of a man admitting to a physical fact he had been fighting. I know, she said. I've been watching you stand for the last 3 minutes. He sat on the examination table. She pulled the monitor over and checked the saturation, 93. Better than before, worse than she wanted. She checked the dressing. Intact, no seepage. The proposal, she said. What are you going to do? Consider it, he said, which was not the answer she had expected. She looked at him. For 2 years I've been operating under the assumption that the Kavar situation resolved only one way, he said. Tonight changed the calculus. He looked at his hands, the first time she had seen him look at his own hands with anything other than purpose. The cost of continuation is too high, not to the organization, to the people in it. She thought about Seaver, who had sold information to protect a daughter he believed was in danger. About Corvin with his shattered thigh, lying in the main house on a recovery bed. About Dax unconscious on the medical wing floor. About the men who had not come back from the warehouse, whose names she had not learned and would now not learn. "You've been carrying this for a long time," she said. "Yes." "The whole operation, the decisions, the cost." "Since my father died, yes." He said it without self-pity, just the fact of it. 17 years. She sat on the stool beside the table. They were at the same height now, which felt significant in a way she didn't try to articulate. "What would you do," she said, "if you weren't doing this?" He looked at her. The question seemed to land somewhere unexpected. "I haven't thought about that in a long time," he said. "Think about it now." A long silence. The medical suite was very quiet. The alarm tone had stopped. The perimeter sounds had settled into the low, watchful activity of a house that had survived the immediate threat and was processing the aftermath. Somewhere in the building, she could hear voices, movement, the sound of people who had been through something bad doing the work of coming back from it. "I had plans," he said finally. "Before. Architecture, actually. I was in school for 2 years." He said it the way people said things they had not said in a long time. Carefully, like touching a bruise to see if it still hurt. "My father needed someone to take the operation, and I was the oldest. That was the argument." A pause. "I don't know that it was the right argument. I was 23 and I believed it was, which is a different thing." She looked at him. "You were 23 and someone handed you an empire and no map." "Something like that." "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I'm 54 and I'm sitting in a medical suite that a surgeon built in my house because I keep getting shot, and I'm trying to remember the last time I made a decision that wasn't reactive." He held her gaze. That might be its own kind of answer. She did not look away. She had stopped looking away from him some time ago, and she had been honest enough with herself in the quiet hours to know when that had shifted and why. "What Kavar proposed," she said. "A structural division. If you took it, what would the forward picture look like?" "It would look like a managed exit," he said. "Slower than cutting and running, safer." He paused. "There are legitimate infrastructure operations embedded in the organization. Import logistics, warehousing, a freight company. The port contracts legitimately held generate actual revenue. If the criminal operation wound down around the legitimate core, over time," he stopped. "It's not a clean exit. Nothing about it would be clean." "Clean is a standard for surgical fields," she said, "not for lives." Something moved across his face, the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him, not the brief sardonic things she had catalogued before, but something realer and less defended, there for a full second before he brought it back. "You're not what I expected," he said. "You didn't expect anything. You were unconscious when we met." "I expected something when I woke up." A pause. "The file on the surgeon at Mercy General. Competent, driven, isolated. I expected competent." "And?" "And I got someone who negotiates hostage releases during kidnappings and sends texts to police detectives without telling anyone." He looked at her steadily. "Which, for the record, I'm choosing not to hold against you." "Because it worked out." "Because it worked out," he agreed. "And because I think you did it for the right reasons, which is more than I can say for most decisions made in this situation." She looked at him. She thought about the detective, Harrow, who was Kavar's inside man, who had received her text and presumably reported it, which had confirmed to Kavar that the leak was discovered and accelerated the night's events. She had caused part of what happened tonight. She understood that. She was not carrying it lightly. "I made a mistake," she said. "Yes." "It could have been worse." "Yes." His voice was even. "It also forced a timeline that may end up being better than the alternative. These things are rarely clean in either direction." He paused. "I told you I don't hold it against you." "I know." She looked at her hands. "I'm telling myself." He watched her do it without speaking, which was the right response, and she recognized it as such. Over the next 3 days, the shape of what came next began to emerge. Corvin's arterial repair was done at a private surgical facility, not Mercy General, a different hospital in the western suburbs where Lucien had relationships that predated the current situation. Alara accompanied him and performed the repair herself, which she was technically not supposed to do at a facility where she did not have privileges, and which she did anyway because the alternative was leaving Corvin's vascular reconstruction to a general surgeon who had not read the field stabilization, and that was not acceptable. The facility did not ask questions. She understood afterward that this was a species of the same world she had been inhabiting for 3 weeks, the one where relationships substituted for formal process, and the quality of the outcome mattered more than the neatness of the procedure. Seaver's daughter arrived home on the second day. Her name was Mara, and she was 24, and she had been held for 4 months and 3 weeks in a facility outside Bratislava under conditions that were not violent but were deliberately designed to produce cooperation through anxiety and isolation. Alara met her briefly. Lucien had arranged for her to be brought to the estate, where a physician Alara trusted could assess her before she returned to her family. She was thin and very contained, in the way people were contained when they had been afraid for a long time and had not yet received confirmation that the fear was over. Alara sat with her for an hour. She asked medical questions and personal questions in the proportion they were needed and listened to the answers with the particular attention she gave to patients who had survived something bad and needed to understand that the surviving was real. When she left the room, Lucien was in the corridor. "How is she?" he said. "She'll recover." Alara looked at him. "She's young and she's strong. She'll need time." He nodded. "Her father," Alara said. "What's going to happen?" A pause. "He'll be removed from the operation. He won't be harmed." He met her eyes. "He did what he did for her. I understand that." She looked at him for a moment. "That's not what I expected you to say." "People do irrational things for their children," he said. "I've been doing the work of one of mine for 30 years. A pause that was long enough to contain something unspoken. "The organization was my father's. Everything I've maintained, everything I've defended, it was for something that was already over. I've just been too deep in it to see the shape clearly. You see it now." "I'm beginning to." The structural agreement with KVAR was negotiated over 5 days through a third-party intermediary, a lawyer who specialized in exactly this kind of transaction, the kind that existed in the specific gray space between legitimate commerce and organizational restructuring. Alara was not part of the negotiation. She returned to Mercy General on the 4th day, driving herself, the black car no longer present on her street. The hospital received her with the particular institutional indifference of places that had no mechanism for acknowledging that you had been gone for 3 weeks under unusual circumstances. Paulette gave her a look that contained several questions and asked none of them. She had a stack of charts and 2 scheduled surgeries and a new resident who had made a systematic error in a post-op protocol that she corrected with the careful precision of someone who understood that correcting mistakes well was more important than identifying them dramatically. She operated on a 61-year-old man with a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm that afternoon. 4 hours and 12 minutes. She came out of it with the hollow, particular exhaustion of a difficult surgery done right, and stood in the scrub room afterward with her hands under cold water, and thought about what she had spent the last 3 weeks learning about how much a body could absorb and still function. Quite a lot, it turned out. More than she had known. Lucien came to the hospital 3 weeks later. Not as a patient, he came in through the main entrance, in a coat and without an escort, which was so different from the first night that Alara almost didn't recognize the form of it when Paulette told her there was someone in the lobby asking for her. She met him in the small family consultation room on the ground floor, a beige room with chairs and a low table and the particular generic calm of spaces designed to receive bad news. He looked better. The color was back. He moved without the left side compensation, and his breathing was... She listened without the stethoscope, the way she always listened, bilateral, even, clean. "Sit down," she said, "and let me look at you." He sat. She checked what she could check without instruments, listened to the breath sounds with her stethoscope from her coat pocket, checked the scar site through his shirt with practiced hands. The repair had held. The tissue had done what tissue did when the original work was good, knit, organized, settled into itself. "You're well," she said. "Yes." He looked at her steadily. The agreement with Kavar was finalized 4 days ago. The port contract transition begins in 6 months. The legitimate operations are already being restructured under a holding company. A pause. Renault is running the transition. He's good at it. And the rest? The rest is winding down, slowly, carefully. Another pause. These things don't end overnight. They end over years quietly, in a direction that looks like retirement from the outside. She nodded. Detective Harrow, she said. The evidence went to the federal division rather than the city department. 3 weeks ago. He's been suspended pending investigation. A brief, even pause. He won't be in a position to report to anyone for some time. She looked at him. You had that evidence ready. I had been building it for 6 weeks. So the whole time while I was at the estate, while tonight happened, the exposure of Harrow was always part of the plan, he said. Your text accelerated the timing. It also forced Kavar's hand before he was fully prepared, which is part of why the warehouse confrontation went the direction it did rather than worse. He held her gaze. Your mistake, as you called it, shortened the war by several months. I didn't say that at the time because I was managing several other things at the time. She absorbed this. You could have told me earlier, she said. Yes. He didn't flinch from it. I was protecting operational security. I'm also aware that sounds like an excuse for not trusting you, and that the distinction is smaller than I'd prefer. She was quiet for a moment. The consultation room was very still. Through the door, she could hear the hospital's ambient sound, the particular white noise of a building full of people in various states of need and recovery, the sound she had worked inside for 14 years. I've been thinking, she said, about what you said. Architecture. He looked at her. Yes. And about what I said, about the medical infrastructure. She met his eyes. The holding company. The resources that are being redirected into legitimate channels. Yes. There are underserved communities in this city that have inadequate trauma access. The Southport District doesn't have a trauma center within viable response distance. People die in that gap. She held his gaze. That's a solvable problem, with the right capitalization. He was very still for a moment. A trauma center, he said, or something that begins as one and grows into more, with the right medical director. She kept her voice level. Someone who has an interest in the outcome. He looked at her with the dark gray eyes that had always given her more than they should, and she looked back, and the thing that had been building since a November night in an OR with gun smoke in the air was present in the room with them now, real and named and no longer requiring management. That's a significant commitment, he said. I'm aware of what commitments cost, she said. I've been paying one for 14 years. Is this you making a proposal? It's me identifying a problem and a possible solution. What you do with it is your decision. He was quiet for a long moment. She let the quiet sit, the way she had learned to let his silences work. The Southport District, he said finally. It's a start. It would take years. Most things worth doing do. He looked at her, and this time the thing in his expression was not managed or partial or arrived and retreated. It was complete and clear, and she received it without looking away. All right, he said. Not dramatically, not with the weight of a declaration. Just 2 words, said with the particular quietness of a decision made after a long time of deciding, the sound of something that had been building, finding the moment it was ready to become real. All right, she said back. 6 months later, the plans were filed. The site in the Southport District had been acquired, an old logistics facility with good bones and better access, 2 blocks from where she had been taken off the street on a Tuesday night in November. The architectural drawings were precise and functional, built around the needs of a working trauma facility rather than the aesthetic of one. And the man who had reviewed them with the project team had done it with the focused attention of someone for whom drawings were not abstract. She found him at the construction site on a morning in late spring, standing at the chain-link fence that surrounded the cleared lot, looking at the framework that had begun to rise from the foundation. She stood beside him. The lake was visible from here, past the end of the block, gray-blue and very large, the kind of body of water that reminded you of perspective. It's going to be good, she said. Yes, he said. He looked at the steel frame. It is. His left hand rested on the chain link, loose and easy. She thought about the scar beneath the shirt, healed now, and about the first night in the OR and the gun behind her ear and the impossible math of that hour, and about the way things moved from what they were to what they became, not in dramatic moments, but in the accumulated weight of smaller ones. She put her hand over his on the fence. He turned his hand and held hers, and neither of them said anything because the framework was rising in front of them and the lake was behind them, and some things did not need language to be complete. The morning light came off the water. The city moved around them. The steel climbed, patient and purposeful, toward something that had not existed before and now would, because two people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances had decided that the world they could build was better than the one they had been handed. Not clean, not easy, not without cost, but real. And theirs.